Hello everyone, my name is Farhan Zudi. I'm one of the Edge Core of NSDC 2020. I'm going to be presenting the post-debate analysis of round 2 of NSDC 2020. So the motion was discussed would break up traditionally dominant political parties in developing democracies, e.g. PDIP and Golkar in Indonesia, Parti Keadilan Rakyat and UMNO in Malaysia, ANC in South Africa. So there are two arguments that you could bring. Obviously, in the level of principle, is it principally justified to break up these traditionally dominant political parties? And on the level of practical consequences, is the breakup of these traditionally dominant political parties will bring net harm or net good to the society in general? So in the government side of the house, in the level of principle, you could argue that the forcible breakup of these political parties could be justified because these parties that are big and consistently winning the election accrue their dominant political foothold through legitimate manners. So you could explain and elaborate the plethora of the way that they use the tactics in politics to get this power in the negative aspects. So you could say that they can get this power not because they display a strong political performance and not because they present the best form of policies towards the society, but they manage to get this power that are big by using harmful tactics such as capitalizing on the notion of founding fathers that were the party's member in the past. This is what was being done by African National Congress, and capitalizing on Nelson Mandela was really good in trying to abolishing the apartheid, but currently they managed to use this founding fathers narrative to skew away and evade from the criticism that they currently do have weak negative economic performance. They do a lot of corruption in status quo right now. They also are unable to have a good management in pandemic COVID-19 crisis. They are also managed to control media narrative and political discourses in society with their huge capital. So they have a lot of shares in the state-owned media, and they can also call it with the private actors that have the private shares in the private media to only display the good side of their governance and not display the bad side, obviously because they want to maintain their power, but also because the other political opponents are not able to have this media control that are as big as them because they don't have that much of capital, which is going to be bad for democracy because not everyone have the same access to the way they can influence society to convince to the policies that are being proposed by these political parties in general. They can also able to do gerrymander or appoint the politically aligned Supreme Court justice for their favor and dynasty. This is important. It means that they can make the election go in the favor of these big political parties because they could redraw the district and the political composition of the society in general, so they could win in a more landslide ways, or when they are not actually winning, they could win it because the gerrymandering process that exists in this a lot of nations. So the democratic process becomes really unfair. So they can also, in the case of dispute about the result of election, make the Supreme Court sides with them because the Supreme Court is the one that is being appointed by these big political parties, and because of this political transaction and quid pro quo, and also because of the dynasty that is being chosen by these big political parties, make their entrenchment and consolidation of power become intergenerational. So there is a long-term harm out of these big political parties if they are not being broken up. Therefore, it creates an even level of playing fields and asymmetric competition with the other political parties, which violates the essence and the cornerstone of democracy, which is to give political access to everyone regardless of their level of privileges. That requires the breakups to restore the true ideal democratic value, especially in the context of developing democracies, in which this inclusion is important to give opportunity to the people that have been disenfranchised in the past. Because when you talk about developing democracy, they have been just transitioned away from their past form of governance that were worse. Either they were in the colonial struggle that they are being led by colonial power, or either because of they were living under apartheid that put these people as the second-class citizen, or they were just freed from civil war or civil struggle that gave them worst life in the past. So when they're currently able to be sovereign and have this democracy, we need to give this opportunity that have been deprived from them in the past. The parallel example to this argument is, when you make principal argument, try as much as possible to find parallel example to make your argument become sensible in the eye of the adjudicators. This is parallel to democracy, always mandate the separation of power between judiciary, legislative, and executive bodies to prevent abuse of power. Thus, you need to explain why these parties already surpassed the threshold of abuse of power with these aforementioned tactics. So you can say, like what I said earlier, that when they have huge capital, they can gerrymander, they can build family dynasty. It harms democracy because eventually people only have limited choices in choosing what is the best for them, because other political parties that are smaller, other political parties that are not as big as them, get outcompeted and kicked away from the political process. So this is parallel to the way that we always do separation of power in democratic system. That's for the government side. In the opposition side, you could bring the principal argument about these political parties managed to become dominant through a fair means, which is a genuine, impactful contribution to a society that translates into societal trust and political capital. You can mention a lot of examples. For example, in Golkar, it was originated from Sukarno's intention to balance the growing strength of Communist Party in Indonesia and the relative economic stability. Yeah, although it's controversial, but some people do like Suharto administration in the past because of the relative economic stability that he brought in pre-1998 revolution. PDIP is a totem also of the Sukarno spirit or legacy for uniting Indonesia under the notion of secularism and nationalism that embrace people across different backgrounds, across race, across ethnics, across gender, and political ideology. UMNO also was able to broker an independence deal with Britain that give Malay people to self-govern and be sovereign with themselves. PKR, Partai Keadilan Rakyat, won the last election due to its advocacy of social justice, minority rights, and anti-corruption agenda. And Nelson Mandela's ANC, as we know, is trusted by society to lead because their contribution to abolish apartheid in South Africa. So it also shows that in democratic system, society does have a choice to shape their political preference in choosing their representative, because it's not autocracy, it's not dictatorship. So the fact that society collectively elect these big parties out of the other available political choices of other political parties, it means this political party is appealing and genuinely qualified to lead the nation, at least in the eyes of the voters. In principle, also, democratic system should never try to limit people's ability to shape their political preference. Democracy should embrace every single participating political entities, because it's also important in the context of developing democracies for people to be given autonomy in choosing what is the best for them, because this autonomy was deprived in past colonialism or past dictatorship or past apartheid or past civil war, because at that point in the past, they were never able to shape their political preference. Now you need to give them this full agency, full autonomy, because this is what they deserve to get. In the past, they've been wrong. This is the way that we can compensate for the mistakes in the past, to never interfere, to never alter their political interference, political preference, to never do this breakup of this political party because society likes them. That's on the level of principle. On the level of practical consequence, is the breakup of these big political parties will create net harm or net good to the society. In the government side of the house, you could bring three important arguments. The first is the breakup of these parties will prevent abuse of power in the government. For example, corruption of state's budget or backdoor dealing with the corporations, arbitrary appointment of cronyism or family members to the position states official, ministry, or head of important government, or the encroachment of states' legislative and judicial power by the executive body, because we have more competitions among political parties that were able to cross-criticize and do check and balance. Second, with the involvement of more political actors in the parliamentary discussion, even though the problem is not as severe of corruption or political dynasty or the encroachment of Supreme Court justice, the other problem that you can bring is currently the policy is stagnated, because there is no political parties that have a good incentive enough to improve or reform their platform, because they know that they can always win the election with the reason that I told you in the principal argument. So now they will have better incentive to reform or improve the policy platform that they have in economic, social welfare, foreign policy or IR by putting the cost on them that they might lose the election if they are settled for less, especially when they have less capital in post-breakup arrangement. When you break up these big political parties, it means that you distribute away their resources. It means that the members were no longer as consolidated and we're no longer as strong. It means the only way they can survive in politics is only by winning the election. So they will be more likely to improve their policy rather than just satisfied with what they have when they are already big. That's the second argument. The third argument that you can also bring the argument about the breakup of these big political parties will equalize the level of playing field with the other potential smaller emerging political parties that tend to bring fresh ideas to the political arena. For example, these smaller political parties that are emerging might come up with revolutionary economic plan rather than the conventional stagnating centrist economic plan that are being held by establishment. Or they might provide platform for the youth that want to actively participate in politics. So it means that, for example, like PS in Indonesia, they might be more representative in trying to increase the level of political participation of the youth, but they can also bring more perspective in the eyes of youth that give the issue of like climate change or like social justice gets more spotlight in the political arena because it's what the youth wants, rather than this politics is saturated by the perspective of the old people, of the elders that do not necessarily care about these contemporary issues on the ground. These new political parties could also advocate for minorities' rights as their basis of campaigns, because we have demographic transition in status quo right now. People get more liberal in the 21st century. When we involve these young individuals, they are more likely to advocate for minorities' rights. And all of this benefit can only happen when these big political parties have their power being reduced and being put at the equal amount of power with these smaller political party. So these are the three arguments that the government can bring. In the opposition side of the house, you could also bring several arguments. The first one is you could tell the adjudicators that the breakup of these parties will be detrimental in the state building process, because these traditionally dominant political parties that often are secular nationalist and serve the uniting factor or serve as the common identity of the people will be fragmented. That translates into people default back into shaping their political preference on the basis of race, ethnic, and religions, rather than the secular nationalist ideology that is being brought by these big political parties. Because these big political parties are big because they are having big umbrella. They are embracing everyone. When you try to fragment and reduce their power into smaller parts of this political party, people will choose the leaders. People will choose their political preference on what they know the most, which is their immutable characteristic on race, ethnic, religions that are going to be so hard for the states to reconcile, especially when these states are most of the times are being put under the same nation because not their consent, but because of the arbitrary border lining that were being done by colonial power in the past. The state fracture possibility as a result, as a consequence of the breakup of this big political party is going to be really likely. Second thing that you can bring in the opposition is in developing democracies, having too many political parties competing in the political sphere will result into instability because people still do not have sufficient political knowledge and have not able to form a mature political culture that will result in unhealthy political competitions. They are not able to debate policy substantively. They are not able to have ethics with their political opponent. They are not able to know how to have genuine compassion with the people that have different perspective with them. So when you have this too much political competition, they will result into the usage of identity politics that are going to be harming the minority. They will spread hoaxes to attack their political opponents. They will attack other people with accusation of scandal rather than debating on policy substantive. So it will bring worse condition to this democratic system and people on the ground. The third thing that you can also bring is you could also tell that the parliamentary political process will also be jeopardized because the legislative body will have a harder time in finding the middle ground of the ideologies of contesting political parties that result into political deadlock, which means the passing of policies that benefit the society will be stuttered, especially when you have like 10 or 15 political parties with their own like left-wing, centrist, and right-wing political agenda, and have like a lot of these competitions. The process of legislative discourses will be very delaying. It will take a really long time. It means that policies such as like social welfare or foreign policy, policies such as economic distribution, that are time sensitive and require as soon as possible solvency for the government will be delayed because of this battle in the political sphere. That means that society will have a longer time in getting the benefit from the political spectrum or political condition that mandate the protection of the society. The fourth thing that you can bring is the political education and socialization of democratic culture to voters in rural area about who are the competing politicians, who are the competing candidates, what are the policies of each candidates, or how to vote, how to engage with your political opponents, or how to interact with people that do not have the same belief with you, which is important in democratic culture to make you able to have better political participation, to make politics become a healthier platform, requires huge capital, name recognition, and grassroots foothold that only owned by traditionally dominant political parties. When you have this reduced power of these big political parties, you don't have this huge capital, you don't have cult of personality, you don't have grassroots foothold that makes society become more distant with the idea of democracy because they do not have the capacity, do not have the resource to understand politics, because the one that hold these resources is big political parties that will no longer exist in the government side of the house. So I think that's all that I can present to you, but it doesn't mean that other arguments that I was not presenting is legitimate to be brought in the debate. It's just my 2 cents, or as adjudicator, as the edge core on the debate that was being debated. So that's all. I hope you all have a good day. Thank you.